Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are. Thank you for joining us on the Apostate Alliance. This is episode number 5, I believe, if I'm remembering correctly. And our guest today is Halima Salat of Ex-Muslim Somali Voices. And she is our fourth ex-Muslim guest. A couple weeks ago, we had an ex-Jehovah's Witness on. Trying to get apostates of all kinds in here, while our focus is on ex-Muslim apostates. And before I get started, I do want to say that the Apostate Alliance is where people can be free to not believe. And I do want to make an apology to last week's guest. When I got started today and setting everything up, I noticed I forgot to put Zara's information in the video description, and I will get right on that after this, and also put all information about Halima in the description of this video. So welcome, Halima. How are you today?
Oh, thank you so much. I'm all right. It's late afternoon here. The sun is still shining. Thank you for having me. I'm quite excited to be here.
Well, we're excited to have you. Now, as I said, Halima is a ex-Muslim. And, before we start, I always like to share a few stories. Twitter is such a marvelous tool because people share stories and they link to different articles and things like that. And as I've mentioned before, when it comes to atheists, we all like to talk about some of the bad things that happen to you when you're an atheist, and some people aren't very nice to you. But here in westernized countries, we don't experience the things that ex-Muslims do a lot around the world. A lot of ex-Muslims who are in Muslim countries where they're more fundamentalist Islam going on, they can have their lives taken if it's found out, or if individuals found out to be gay, they can also be killed. So that's the big reason why we have decided to talk to ex-Muslims on this broadcast, because the atrocities that they suffer kind of make our experiences in the Western world as atheists kind of pale in comparison. I couldn't even point you to a news story, where an atheist in a Western country has had their life taken. I'm sure it's happened, but it does not happen with the frequency that it happens in the Muslim world. And that is not to say by any stretch of the imagination. One thing I love about all these individuals I'm meeting on Twitter, Fay the Most Gracious, and Salima here, and Zara, and all the rest, Apostate Ali, is they're always out there. Yes, they're atheists, but they also decry and tell everybody that'll listen, hey, don't go after Muslims. Okay, this isn't about you going after Muslims, because the vast majority of the Muslim world are just all good people like the rest of us that just have some bad ideas. When we talk about people who are getting their lives taken, that's the more fundamentalist Muslims that do that. But unfortunately, in some of these countries, there are very, very many fundamentalists. But I just want to get Salima's thoughts on a couple of things here before we get started. One thing I wanted to share, this person who I just followed, Divorce Religion is his handle on Twitter, and go give this person a look. I just thought this was wonderful. They tweeted out the other day, the meaning of life is to give life meaning. A lot of believers, say that you can't have any meaning to your life if you don't believe in God. But he said the meaning of life is to give life meaning. We must stop being meaning seekers and embrace being meaning makers. the former leaves us vulnerable, while the latter is deeply empowering. So that's just in response to a lot of believers like to say that us atheists, have no meaning in our life. Well, we do have meaning. We have the meaning that we make of it. And also, and I'm not going to even show these videos, but there was this story that Quotes Forbidden put out. That's her handle on Twitter. A story about a young man who thought it would be funny to play a prank on his father during Ramadan, and fooled his father into thinking that he had been eating during Ramadan, and it was all just a joke. And there's the video of it here. I can link it in the video description. I don't really want to show it, but his father is... Oh, we lost our guest. Well, hopefully she will come back. But he took a pretty bad beating. And what I am going to do... Oh, here she is back already. As I sit here melting down, wondering what has happened.
I seem to have disappeared there, and I had to reload the.
Right. Yeah. I don't know why that happened. We were good on this end, but I don't know how much you heard of what I heard, but the story about the young man who played the prank on his father, and his father. The video here, it shows him getting severely beaten by his father for playing a prank on him.
I haven't come across that. Was that on Twitter?
Yes, it was put on Twitter by @Quotes Forbidden here a couple of days ago. And I bring it up to ask you this: is that something that is very common in the more fundamentalist Muslim world?
The thing is, I haven't seen the what you're talking about, the specific case, but I can talk on the general.
Yeah.
A joke. We have a number of young people who sometimes just want to test the waters, so to speak, and would make something that they would think would be a joke. If it's touching on religion, then the response or the reaction becomes something extremely either violent or it's not a joke anymore. You know what I mean?
Yes.
From your description, even though I haven't seen, it's something that I can recognize, and I would not be surprised.
And there was another one here, and I didn't bookmark it, but somebody put out a tweet the other day where this Muslim gentleman was complaining about he had met a Muslim couple, and the gentleman introduced himself to and then this Muslim gentleman's wife had said hello to this gentleman and stuck her hand out to shake his hand. And this preacher, whoever he was, and he was speaking in English, he was in this video, basically calling her and her husband stupid. And he was very upset about the fact that this woman had talked directly to him and had put her hand out to shake his hand. Is that like a normal practice amongst the more fundamentalist Muslims?
Well, that comes from the scripture, actually, the Quran, the Hadith, about the place of women in an Islamic context. So even though some people would argue there's different interpretations, what you would see on a general basis, that act of putting out her hand, because the scriptures are against, for example, women shaking the hands of men who are not either their husband, their brother, or their father. uh, and so that is it almost looks like the man in this sense then enforcing that kind of teaching towards the woman. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, absolutely. And I did forget to mention also, for those of you who come here only because you're such big fans of Fay's, I do apologize. She was unable to join us today. She has something she had to do today. And she will be back next week. I know I'm not the draw on the show, Fay is. So, but luckily we have Salima here with us. Now, just to start out, could you take a few moments and tell us about your organization, Ex-Muslim Somali Voices?
Well, Ex-Muslim Somali Voices was born from a need, even within the larger ex-Muslim movement, so to speak, where majority of ex-Muslims from different various backgrounds would have parallels they can draw because of the scriptures, the Quran, the Hadith, but then we've realized that the reaction to apostasy from Muslim communities is harshest when the person is Somali. And even larger ex-Muslim organizations have mentioned this to me, saying that we've seen, especially those living in the West, so to speak, where the reaction to apostasy in most cases happens where the young person or the young adult or teenager, it doesn't matter whatever age they are, is taken out of their safe zone of in a Western country, for example, here in the Netherlands or the UK or US, and taken back to either to Somalia or Kenya, where then they are forced to undergo religious re-education. And this is not something that had been also being highlighted within the ex-Muslim movement. So I thought that this is a niche, so to speak, that I can focus my energy on and my activism on, because I'm ethnically Somali myself, and I do get, majority of the hate I get online, I would say 90% is Somali Muslims, 90%.
Oh, wow.
So there's a tribal aspect of things that I wanted to kind of push back against, hence Ex-Muslim Somali Voices.
Well, and you mentioned something there that kind of reminded me of something we talked about on the show in the past, and that I've read a little bit about. Isn't it a fact that like in the westernized world, that there are some Muslims that they will plan trips for their children to places like Somalia, so that they can perform, female genital mutilation and do these, re-education things that you're talking about?
I mean, it's a phenomenon. It's even called in the Somali language, it's called Dhaqan Elis, which basically translates to, it's a loose term that translates to back to culture, but it can be used for all sorts of things like FGM, gay conversion, forced religious re-education, so to speak, for the westernized young people. And what happens normally in this kind of situations is that there's a lot of abuse and they're locked up, because recently I was involved in an international rescue for a US citizen who became a victim of that. And she was closeted ex-Muslim. She reached out to me, and we worked together with ex-Muslims of North America. Absolutely great. It was my first time to rescue somebody internationally. It was intense, basically. And what happens in those kind of situations is, first of all, if the person has been living or was born in a Western country, their cell phones, all communications with the outside world, everything that they can possibly reach out to is taken away, where even it's very difficult to reach out to, let's say, embassies abroad in the country where they live in. In the country they're born in, or they hold citizenship of, or residency of. If they're shipped off to Somalia or Kenya, it becomes very difficult for them to be able to even reach the embassies, because all sorts of communication and personal freedom is cut off. It's like a kidnapping by the family, so to speak.
Right. And so let's get started here. We want to hear about your story. I think it's important that we, hear about how people made their way out of Islam to become apostates. And could you just take a few minutes now and talk about what things were like during the time you were a Muslim?
The thing is, it's a long time ago, because I was in the closet for 9 years. And the reason why I was in the closet for 9 years, I've moved to Western Europe about 4-5 years ago, almost 5 now. And 2 of those years, I was just like preparing myself to come out, because it's a big deal to come out. And 6 years, I was living in Kenya, because that's where I come from. That's where I was born. And in that state, you just don't risk sharing your lack of belief, so to speak. But for me, majority of my journey started with rebelling against certain things, against dressing, against hijab, against forced marriages, this and that. I underwent FGM when I was 6 years old. And then I went into living an independent life, so to speak. And then when I arrived here, that's when I thought, you know what, I'm actually going to come out with my lack of faith. Now I'm ready. I'm in a safe place. I'm going to do it now. And that's basically my story. And I've talked about my story in bits and pieces with other podcast, secular jihadists. I've talked to Maryam Namazie on just the day after I came out, actually, because Maryam was very instrumental in my coming out. She had an event that was happening here in Amsterdam, and she invited me, and that's when I stood in a podium and I said, "Hi, I'm an ex-Muslim."
Wow, yeah, and I follow her on Twitter. She's wonderful.
Yeah.
Now, do you remember it all, like what it was? You say it's been nine years now, and a great portion of that in the closet. Which there are a lot of ex-Muslims that have to stay in the closet. Like you were saying, because it can cause them danger, depending on where they're living at. But do you remember it all? Like, when did you start questioning your faith? What was it that first started you down that line of thinking, hey, maybe this stuff isn't true?
Yeah, it's normally, I can never pinpoint a place, but I do remember even as young as 10 questioning certain things, like, why does my brother get away with this and I don't? Why do I have to go to madrasa? I don't know if you know what madrasa is, but it's an Islamic school that is special. Even though I was attending regular school, there was always evenings and weekends to go and learn Quran and Hadith and everything. And I hated it. I wanted to go to drama. I wanted to do other things. And I remember feeling uncomfortable about those things, but not necessarily saying this is what I question. But later on in life, after I attended college and I went through a phase of religious, like I wanted to learn more and to understand the Quran and the Hadith, and what is this that I don't feel very comfortable. Maybe I am ignorant, and that was when I'm like, no. The more I read, the more I concluded that I don't want to believe that.
Well, and I find that's common in apostates of all varieties. I continually hear ex-Christians say the same thing. Yeah, I read the Bible, and one person in particular, I remember, they heard an atheist online talking about all the slavery in the Bible. And they had not read much of the Bible, even as a Christian, and they didn't believe that at all. They argued with the person. Well, no, that can't be true. But then after they had this discussion, this person went back and found all that in the Bible about slavery, and that's the same thing. They started down the road of apostasy because they said, "Wait a minute, this stuff in this holy book is just crazy."
Yeah, I also remember at the same time when I'm trying to learn about the Quran and the Hadith, landing on a PDF of Richard Dawkins' book, The God Delusion.
Right.
And I remember being shit scared of reading this book in case I'm found out that I'm reading it. And basically hiding how I would read because I was living with my family at the time. And just the more I read the Quran, and the more I read that book, and I was doing this at the same time, by the way, the more, I just couldn't reconcile. And so I accepted it to myself, and I came to terms with it. And I said, this is all bullshit. I don't believe.
Yeah. So when you did finally come out, how did your family respond to that?
Oh, okay. First of all, like I said, I had kind of taken a trajectory of rebellious, then tried to be religious. And then that didn't work. That didn't even last very long, by the way. It was about 2-3 months. And then coming to terms, and then leaving a comfortable zone of 9 years of detaching myself from my family and just living. I wouldn't say I don't believe, but I am not within my community, within my family kind of thing. And I went ahead and I married outside my community, my religious background. And my daughter was born, and I tried to have a relationship with my family when my daughter was born. She's 10 now. And my mom called my daughter Haram, which is the opposite of halal, which means forbidden, unwanted, forbidden. It's the only way I can translate it, is forbidden. And
yeah, I'm familiar with that term.
Yeah, so when that happened is when I completely just severed ties with my own family, and I chose my daughter. And I'm happy now. And then that led to, moving abroad and this and that. And when I came out, my public activity has obviously reached back home, and there's I would say already relationships that were strained now has gone to cursing and wishing I die, or
boy, I'll tell you, and that's such a familiar story. Since I've been getting to know ex-Muslims, the horrible things that people's their own blood do and say to them, over this issue of religion. And just take a moment, folks in the audience, and whoever watches this as a video in the future, to what Halima just said. Her own mother said that her own granddaughter is haram, that she's bad.
You see, the thing where that comes from is basically in the scripture, in the Quran, the Hadith, about women's reproductive marriage or love choices and this and that is tied to a woman, a Muslim-born woman, cannot marry or be in a relationship or have children or that sort of thing with a non-Muslim. And the father of my kids is is a non-Muslim. So in my mother's perspective, from a religious perspective, my child was conceived and born haram. And for me, I had already reached a level of I don't believe, but it wasn't a declaration. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah.
And so for me, when it comes to severing ties with family, it was already strained, and then that reached, and so that's when then I made the choice. It's my child. Versus the rest of my family, so to speak.
Well, let me ask you. You say you have two children. When you look back to what how your mother said about your child, can you imagine any kind of scenario where you would feel that way about your children?
No, that's the thing. The way I look at it, and the way in hindsight, I look at it is my life and my thought went in a different direction, and my family is stuck in a certain way. And at this stage in my life, I'm not angry. I'm very comfortable that I chose my child. I'm very, very comfortable. That's not something that I would ever compromise.
It doesn't sound like you'd ever question it either, which is
I don't.
So since you did sever all ties and now are known publicly as an apostate, how did that change your life? Was your life already changing when you were still in the closet, or once?
Yeah, it was. But at the same time, when I came out, those of us in the public, ex-Muslims who are in the public, we're like family. We like got each other's back. And that is something that opened up for me when I came out. Obviously, before, when I was in the closet, I was also being supported in the closet, but I was behind the screen, a pseudonym, not with my real identity. So as much as the support was there, nobody really knew what my opinions and thoughts are. And now, those of us who are in the public, because we understand the backlash, first of all, there's backlash everywhere. But there's backlash when you say it publicly. It's another level.
Right.
Yeah. And this level is now, this is when you attract the internet hate. You attract threats, rape threats, death threats, all sorts of threats. And this is something that sometimes personally, it's been a year since I came out. There's so many in my inboxes that I just like scroll through, There's so many that you just keep scrolling through. And that can be sometimes when the number is so large, you can have a blind spot where somebody may have sent you a threat like, I will hack your accounts, and you just ignore it. And it happened to me. All my accounts were hacked a couple of months ago.
Wow. Yeah, I remember when like I mentioned earlier, the person that got me down this path is, um, there's another YouTuber, and she's on on the the Facebook and the Twitter and all that too. Topic Thunder.
Yeah.
Yeah, and she ended up introducing me to Fay, because after and I forget what it's called, but in England they have like something that's tantamount to the Faithless Forum, and that might even be I can't remember the name off the top of my head. And I did a stream where we talked to people from that, and Topic Thunder ended up introducing me to Fay. And when I started following Fay on Twitter and seeing all this hate being spewed at her, and how Fay is, she doesn't take no guff off anybody, she would go right back at them.
Yeah.
And I started jumping into these Twitter threads and, telling these people, how horrible they were and all that. And I just was amazed. It was just like this, hate fest all day long. Like all that these, hateful Muslims did was go online all day and
and that's the thing. We even have like this colloquial term, we say Muslim Twitter. And this can be all sorts of people in different places sitting behind computers, just targeting ex-Muslim accounts, and all day spending all day spewing hate and threats, and there are vulnerable members within the publicly ex-Muslims, I would say, or even some of them who are in the closet but have accounts where they share their views. There are vulnerable members who sometimes this becomes too much, and they internalize it and they take it. For me, I look at it and I'm like, if there's a real threat, I've informed the police. Like, and these are things you kind of have to do even when you're in a free country. As a public ex-Muslim, for example, I had to delete my children, all activities where, because I'm a poet as well, sometimes I wouldn't share the location of the poetry reading I'm going to. I had to delete my children from my Facebook. All this because I'm a public ex-Muslim. Because there'll be nutters out there, even in the country where I live in, which is the freest country in the world, I consider it that way. There'll be nutters out there who will, would be focusing on that information. So online safety is something that we have to keep on reinventing as ex-Muslims who are in the public sphere over and over again.
Well, and I know exactly what you're talking about, not because I experienced it, but like when I first became friends with Fay, and there was an incident where, she was getting some pretty horrible threats online. And I was worried for her, because she is so brave and she is so out there, and, she'll tell people, why they're wrong and all that. And I probably unfounded, but because she, but like you said, it doesn't matter what country you're in, it can still happen, so I found myself worrying for her, here across the pond here in the United States. But
I have friends who worry for me as well. They're like, can you just stop posting things? I'm like, no.
Right. Yeah. And I can remember, similar. I never asked Fay to stop or anything, but I could just hear her saying the same thing. No, I'm not going to stop.
Yeah, but it also comes from because I am friends with a lot of people from the skeptic community, from the atheism community, from other backgrounds, Christianity, Judaism, it doesn't matter, and who don't understand. It's not as level when you're an atheist from an Islamic background and when you're an atheist from, let's say, a Christian background. And the way I explained it is because Christianity has gone through all these years of being mocked that it's kind of lost its hold. But Islam is still at that place where right now those of us who are pushing back are like, we want to make it as irrelevant as possible as well.
Well, and then, going back to what I was saying before about how folks like you and Fay and Zara, even though you don't believe anymore, you guys are sometimes the first one out there when people are persecuting Muslims to say, no, that's not right. That's not what this is about. And what it comes down to, and I hear a lot of, ex-Christians saying too, is that it's not that, it's not that I'm saying or other atheists are saying that all Christians are horrible and bad. All we're saying is that they have bad ideas. And
that's the thing. And this was what my tweet of yesterday was about, because I'm sick and tired of people in political Western world conflating these two, Muslims and Islam. When we criticize Islam, it is not the people. We have wishy-washy Muslims, we have liberal Muslims, we have Muslims who are just like, and we have fundamentalists. It's not the people. It's the scripture. It's the words and the ideas. And the fact that, and even within the wishy-washy Muslims, you have people who are apologists who would always yank out the Islamophobia card. And those guys as well were like, no, what you're saying basically is you're comfortable cherry picking, but at the same time, you don't want us to say what's in the scripture. That is trying to muzzle my freedom of speech. And this conflation, it even happens within the atheist community, where they always have to have a disclaimer when they're talking about Islam. Yeah, but also Christianity. I'm like, no, right now we're talking about Islam. So if we're talking about Islam, if we're talking about something in the Hadith or the Quran, and a certain verse that talks about women should be beaten by their husbands, that's what we're going to talk about. It doesn't mean that when you talk about what's in the Quran or the Hadith, that it means that all Muslim people. No. It gets a bit frustrating sometimes, I'll tell you that.
Well, and I don't know if I've felt the frustration to the level you do, but I feel frustration a lot of times, because here's the thing: when it comes to atheists, apostates, whatever you want to call them, I only come in contact with those like-minded people online. And when it comes to in the real world, everyone who I hold dear, all of my loved ones, they all believe in God. Okay. And I don't have, I'm fortunate in that I didn't have a schism with my family like you have suffered. And so when I see atheists online saying that all Christians are bad, or all Christians do this, that, and the other thing, and they're all idiots, or whatever pejorative thing they say, I always go after them and explain what I just explained to you. Them, look, you're saying that all Christians are this, that, and the other thing. Well, you know what? Everybody in my life is a Christian. Everybody I love is a Christian, and they're not those things, bad things you're saying.
Yeah, and that's the thing. We have prominent ex-Muslims who fortunately have good relationships with their family. That's progress. That's progress. And for me, that's something that I think always it's very important to separate the idea from the people. And this is something I constantly have to repeat, and it frustrates me that I even have to say it, that I have to continually repeat.
Yeah, it is frustrating, and it's frustrating on a personal level, but it's also frustrating because it's that type of argument is logically fallacious. It doesn't make any logical sense, because the minute you make a sweeping generalization like that and you say all of this group are this certain way, or all of this group is bad, you're committing a logical fallacy, because it's not possible for all within any group to be exactly the same.
Yeah, and I think it also comes from the idea of being stuck in Orientalism and the way the political landscape is about a certain group. That's all, if they hold a religious, one religion, that's all that group is. And I think that's where the conflation also comes, especially in Western media spheres, that Muslims mean Islam and Islam means Muslims, and that's not the case. Also, it can't be racism because Islam and Muslims are not one race. They're not one race. I mean, there's all sorts of colors within the Muslim community, so to speak. So for me, the frustration does come when I'm like, do you even know the difference between the idea and the people? And so, yeah, that's what I mean by and I know it can come off as very passionate in that sense.
Oh, yeah. Well, you seem like a passionate person, for sure. And what you were just talking about, too, it's because, of course, now, if you are anti-Muslim and you just, think that all Muslims are bad, that is a form of bigotry. But like you mentioned, it's not racism. And I noticed that myself, that a lot of Muslims like to pull that racism card.
That card has been used a million times. It gets boring. It gets really boring.
So something that I have experienced that I don't know if maybe you as an ex-Muslim have experienced, but there are fond, some fond memories, from my time as a Christian, like I don't know, how it works in Islam, but like, the church that I went to when I was younger, we would have like get-togethers, and like maybe after church there would be like a potluck dinner where everybody would meet down in the basement, and we'd share food and all that stuff. And there was friends that I made in church that that was all pleasant. Is there any fond memories from your time in Islam that that you maybe wish that you could still take part in?
One of the hardest things about being for example, this is how I normally define myself. I have family in the descending. I don't have family in the ascending. So one of the hardest things is normally missing the sort of food sharing or family gatherings, or just being in a large, loud family. And as an adult, I had to learn how to be an individual by myself, and how to navigate life that way. And so there are those memories. But when I compare to and this is my personal situation, when I compare what I miss in that sphere to what I have become, any day I still choose what I've become.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Me too, for sure.
Yeah.
Now, I guess what we could do right now, since we have several people that joined us that weren't here in the beginning, could you take a few minutes and talk about your organization again, Ex-Muslim Somali Voices?
Well, actually, it's quite a new organization, and we're still setting up. I have a couple of videos on YouTube. Interviewing other ex-Muslim Somalis. We want to make it quite a global phenomenon, because Somali ex-Muslims are spread out throughout the world, and they tend to reach out to a person like me or any other Somali ex-Muslim who has come out. And I'm in touch with a larger ex-Muslim movement globally. But the idea basically is to focus on the peculiar problems faced by ex-Muslims from the Somali background who would be maybe shipped off to back to Africa for religious re-education, who would be kicked out from their homes, even if they live in a Western country, because the life of their parents and their lives are completely two different trajectories, and they tend to get lost in the system that way. So ex-Muslim Somali Voices is basically to give voice to as many as possible ex-Muslim Somalis, because there are many and they're in the closet. A lot of them are in the closet.
Well, and thus far in this show, I've told a lot of people I've reached out to that want to come on and have, heard back from them. Yeah, I don't think I can be on because I'm closeted and, I don't want to. And so, but we've been lucky so far. We've been talking to a lot of folks like you and Zara and Fay who are out there. And thus far, nobody has had to come on and not be on camera. Or I've also suggested to folks, not only don't you have to be on camera, we can point you to an app that will modulate your voice so that people won't recognize your voice. And, somewhere down the line, there's a few people I've talked to in that type of situation. We will have someone like that on. And it's just so unfortunate that anybody,
the being in the closet thing actually comes from, I do personally, I struggle to reconcile why people, right now in the world, there are 13 countries where just saying I don't believe in Islam will get you killed by the state. But even in the West, there are family dynamics where saying I don't believe will have you kicked out of home, will have you support or financial or whatever would be, violence maybe, being shipped off to your parents' home country would be, a thing that can just happen like that. So the fact that there are a large number of people who are still in the closet means that our work is not yet done. I'll stop being an activist the day there's nobody in the closet.
Well, and just, to kind of extend that thought, if and when that day happens, it won't have happened until there is a big reconversion or a big change in fundamentalist thought. I see a day like that could happen in the future, and that doesn't mean that all religion will be eradicated. It'll just mean that the extremist forms of the religions will maybe not be there anymore.
Yeah, but I think religion should be a private affair where you do in your living room or in your bedroom or whatever. The moment religion becomes something that you have to enforce in a public sphere, that's when then it's problematic. And that's what's happening in these 13 countries where apostasy is punishable by law, and all the countries that actually have blasphemy laws, including Scotland, that recently had a new bill that's being passed where it's kind of like a backdoor blasphemy law. And there are so many countries, even though the laws are secular, there are clauses that are, blasphemy laws are in there. And for as long as we live in a world and a society where your thought, your choice of whatever you want to believe in becomes something that has to be enforced, then it's a long road. I personally believe it's such a long road.
Yeah, it is, and I'm in my 50s, and I don't think I'll be around when that day comes that you spoke of, where everybody.
Neither will I.
Yeah.
Probably my children.
It's a long prospect. It's a long, short undertaking. Now, why don't we, take a few minutes, or you take a few minutes and talk about what platforms you're on and where people can find you. Like I can't remember. Are you a YouTuber as well?
Yeah, I am. I do have this one channel for ex-Muslim Somali voices where I actually interview other ex-Muslim Somalis who are brave enough to come on the podcast. It's very difficult to get people. Some people would sometimes say, "Yeah, I would like to come on," but they start looking at the repercussions and they change their mind. So we're still very small. I've only had like 4 guests now, and that is the platform that I'm working on. But I've also like just the same way I'm talking to you, I've been on Rahman podcast, Aron Ra. I've been on Secular Jihadist. I've been on Fay's channel. I've been on Maryam Namazie's channel, which is normally broadcast. It's called Bread and Roses, and it's broadcast in Iran. So there's a couple of things that we're still doing with collaboration with all other ex-Muslims. I do have some speaking engagements where here in Amsterdam, we had this huge festival that was going on called Celebrating Dissent, where almost everyone in the ex-Muslim movement was here, and I spoke there as well. So this a few speaking engagements that I do engage in.
And you also mentioned, I think earlier, that you have a blog as well. Yeah,
I do. It's kind of dead, but yeah, I do. Just stuff to air my head. I'll maybe you can post the link there.
Well, right, and you're kind of taking the words out of my mouth, because that was I was just about to say is, despite me falling down on the job last week and not getting our guest info in the video description there, yes, shortly after we end today, I'll ask Halima right now to DM me any links that you want to go into the video description, and I will get those up right away before the day is over.
Nice.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I will also go back to last week's video and put my guest info in that I forgot.
Yeah.
Which, if your listenings are, I do apologize. So now I find myself, because Fay's not with us today, and as I said, hopefully she'll be back with us next week. This is the first interview I've conducted in these 5 episodes.
You're doing fine.
Yeah. And well, I just don't seem to be going as long as, and I think what it is because all the guests we've had thus far were good friends of Fay's, and they had many discussions with them. And I noticed that all of those episodes usually run like an hour and a half to 2 hours. But we kind of find ourselves at the end of it here, because while the audience was learning about Halima, I was also learning about Halima. I followed her for many months on Twitter, but never have talked to her in person. And I just want to say what a delightful guest you were. And I want to thank you so much for coming on.
Well, thank you for having me. I was quite excited to come on, actually. I was like, yeah, I'm going to go. Yeah, I was super excited because I watched all the episodes. The episode you were with Ali Malik, and Ali Malik is a great friend of mine. I mean, Zara is a great friend. Fay, we're like, in touch on the background as well. And so I watched all the episodes, and I quite liked how it went. So thanks.
Yep, no problem. And I'll mention too, like when I first reached out to you through DMs on ex-Muslim Somali Voices, I didn't put it together that you were Halima Salat. And here I thought, and then when I saw when you tweeted at me on your Halima Salat, I said, oh wait, yeah, I know her. I followed her a long time ago. And I was.
That's probably my fault, because even though in my personal account I say Dreamer at ex-Muslim Somali Voices, because it's still an idea that's in infancy. in the other account, I'm also interacting with people, and sometimes I also forget, like, was I interacting with a person? Because I don't have anyone to help me at the moment, and I've been asking for. There's a few volunteers who are thinking about it, because ex-Muslim Somali Voices isn't like my project per se. It's supposed to be for the voices of ex-Muslims from the Somali background, who are majority of them are in the closet. But it's the thing is, it's so hard for people to own up being an ex-Muslim from the Somali community, that they would rather just stay under the radar, and not disturb the life they currently live, where they have a life online and a different life offline. But it's great that you reached out, and this will give us kind of exposure, I think, to some extent. So thank you for having me.
Yep, no problem at all. And what I was going to allude to was just something kind of humorous, that when I did book you, I thought to myself, okay, well, here I booked someone finally that Fay doesn't know, and and then as soon as I told her who I booked, she's like, oh no, I know her too.
No, Fay probably told you booked Halima.
So, all right, thank you so much. I want to take a minute here and thank people in the audience for joining us. Korg Nightwolf is here, Loose Fraw Mighty, Critical Cripple. He was the first one here this morning. Well, I guess this afternoon for where he's at in the world. Ishtaq Hussein is here. Of course, our own Raging Atheist was here on his Nakasuchi account. And Boomer.
Lucifer Almighty.
Yeah. And anybody I missed, I do apologize. I'm always bad at this. And I'm just looking now to see if anybody had posted any questions for you in here that I missed, which I'm famous for doing. And I don't really see any. So just remember, we do this every Sunday. Please share this. We'd like to get more eyes on these podcasts. It's very important to bring these ex-Muslims into, the atheist and skeptic community. They all feel as if they are part of that community already, but we don't see them around as much. It was very heartening to me to hear Halima talk about all the different podcasts she's been on, like Aron Ra and folks like that, because these folks, these ex-Muslims, they are part of our community. They're our brothers and sisters, and we want to endeavor to bring them into the community even further. I want to thank everybody for being here. We will be here next week. And remember, the Apostate Alliance is where you can be free to not believe.